So today we're really diving deep into a fascinating guy, Anders Holch Povlsen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because when you hear his name, you might not, you might immediately recognize it, but he's someone who embodies this kind of contradiction. You know, he's a fashion CEO,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also like this land tycoon, this conservationist.
Yeah, it's not your typical kind of rags to riches
Yeah.
story that you might expect. When you think about someone who owns, a huge amount of land in Scotland,
Right.
and at the same time runs this like global fashion empire.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who haven't heard of Anders before, like imagine this, right? You're browsing ASOS for like a new jacket, which by the way is one of his investments.
Right.
And then you see this news article about this massive rewilding project in Scotland. And it's spearheaded by the same guy who you might be buying that jacket from.
That's Anders in a nutshell, right? It's a really interesting story because it starts back in 1975 with his parents, actually. They start this company called Bestseller, and they start with a single shop, and it's in a small Danish town. And it just blossoms from there into this global fashion powerhouse.
Wow.
You've got brands like Vero Moda, Jack & Jones. All these are under the Bestseller umbrella.
Okay, so we're talking serious fashion pedigree here. But then it gets even more interesting,
Wow.
right? Because at 28 years old, Povlsen inherits the entire company.
Yeah, 28 years old.
I can't even imagine.
I was eating ramen noodles and hoping to find a clean pair of socks at 28. I can't imagine inheriting a global company.
Yeah, the level of responsibility,
Yeah.
right? And not just to kind of keep things afloat, but to actually grow and expand what his parents had built. And, he didn't just rest on his laurels. He had this vision. He steered Bestseller towards e-commerce really early on. He was investing in ASOS, investing in Zalando, like these platforms that really reshaped how we buy clothes today. That's wild. So he's not just like some kid who inherited a bunch of money. This guy's got serious business chops.
Yeah, he understands the fashion industry. He's making really strategic decisions. And you can't underestimate that.
Okay, so we've got the fashion mogul side down, but then there's this whole other dimension to him.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting because he's also like this, I don't even know what the right term is, land baron, rewilding enthusiast.
Yeah, King of the Highlands, something like that.
He owns over 221,000 acres of Scotland.
Right. And that's more than 3 times the size of New York City.
It's unbelievable.
Hard to even fathom that much land.
Yeah, how do you even conceptualize that much land? But the point is, he's not just buying it to build himself a castle and, put up a no trespassing sign. He's on a mission to rewild these lands, to basically undo centuries of human impact.
Exactly. He wants to bring back that wild beauty. And he's talking about restoring entire ecosystems, from the ground up. We're talking reforestation, reintroducing native species, restoring peatlands, which is this whole other thing.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
It's a long game he's playing. But the potential environmental payoff is huge.
That's incredible. So he's got this vision for Scotland, where it's this pristine wilderness again.
It's like stepping back in time in a way to how it might have been.
That's so cool. But here's the thing. There's this other side of the story too. And that's where things get a little bit, complicated. Because we've got the fashion mogul turned eco-warrior, buying back the Highlands, restoring them to their former glory. But then you've got the private jets.
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room, right? Or the jet in the room, I guess you could say.
Right, exactly.
Because on one hand, he's pouring millions into rewilding Scotland, but he's also facing criticism for his own carbon footprint, specifically the use of private jets by Bestseller, his company.
And we're not talking about just a few flights here and there. According to this report from DR.
Yeah, that's a Danish news outlet, by the way.
Right, DR, you see his company's jets, made over 1,100 flights in just a few years.
That's a lot of flights.
It's a lot of flights. And we're talking about way higher CO2 emissions compared to commercial flights.
Yeah, it's a tough look when you're also out there championing sustainability.
It's like a disconnect, right? How can you be so passionate about protecting the environment on one hand and then be contributing to its destruction on the other?
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Exactly. You're trying to do good, but the way you're going about it just doesn't quite add up.
And this isn't just about Anders. It speaks to this larger issue of greenwashing. Companies or individuals touting all these eco-friendly practices, but then their actions contradict those claims.
Totally. It's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And it makes you wonder, what are their priorities really?
Right. Are they genuinely committed to sustainability? Or is it more about image, more about looking good?
And that's a tough question to answer. because it's not always black and white.
Right.
People are complex. Companies are complex. It's not always easy to disentangle their motivations and their actions.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole story so fascinating.
It's interesting how this whole thing plays out with Anders and Bestseller. Because on one hand, you have these accusations of greenwashing, right? Like they're trying to present this eco-friendly image. But then their actions don't necessarily line up.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Because it's not like they're ignoring sustainability altogether. Like Bestseller, they have made some genuine efforts to address their environmental impacts.
Right. They've got like sustainable clothing lines. They've made commitments to reduce their carbon footprint.
Exactly. So it's not like a complete facade. But then you have these private jets, and it kind of throws a wrench in the whole thing.
It undermines the other efforts. You know what I mean?
For sure. And it makes you question how sincere they really are about making a difference.
Exactly. It's like, are they more concerned with appearing sustainable or actually being sustainable?
Right. And that's a question that a lot of consumers are asking these days. Because there's so much greenwashing going on, it's hard to tell who's actually walking the walk and who's just talking the talk.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes this whole story about Anders so interesting, because it highlights this tension between these big, ambitious goals and then the reality of how we live our lives.
Yeah.
And the choices we make.
Exactly. Because it's easy to say, oh, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Yeah.
Or we're going to plant 1 million trees. But then it's like, what are you doing on a daily basis to actually make those things happen?
Totally. And I think that's what people are starting to pay attention to. It's not just about the big picture stuff anymore. It's got the everyday decisions.
Absolutely. And it's not just about companies either. It's about all of us. Like, what are we doing to reduce our own impact? Even if it's just small things.
Right. Like maybe we can't all go out and buy thousands of acres of land and rewild them.
Right.
But we can make different choices in our own lives.
Exactly. And those choices, they do add up, especially when we all start making them together.
I love that. So we've talked about the fashion empire. We've talked about the land ownership and the rewilding efforts and the private jets. But there's another layer to this story that I think is worth unpacking, and that's the personal aspect. Because Anders Holch Povlsen, he's not just this abstract figure. He's a human being with his own motivations and his own experiences. And I think to fully understand this story, we need to delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think sometimes when we talk about billionaires, it's easy to forget that they're just people too, with their own hopes and dreams, and struggles.
Exactly. And Anders has definitely had his share of struggles.
Yeah. And, it's not like we're trying to dig up dirt here or put him on trial.
Of course not.
It's more about recognizing that these contradictions, these complexities, they're part of what make him human. And they're probably something that a lot of us can relate to on some level. Absolutely. It's like we're all trying to figure out how to live in this world, how to make a difference, and how to reconcile our own values with our actions.
Exactly. And, sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we make choices that maybe don't align perfectly with what we believe in.
We're all works in progress, right?
Totally. And I think it's important to remember that, especially when we're talking about someone like Anders, who's in the public eye and who's often held to this really high standard.
Yeah, it's easy to judge from the outside. But we all have our own blind spots, our own areas where we could be doing better.
For sure. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't about taking sides or pointing fingers.
Yeah.
It's about having an honest conversation about these complex issues and trying to understand them from different perspectives.
I think that's a great way to put it. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We are.
And the more we can learn from each other, the better equipped we'll be to face the challenges ahead.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway here is that the world is full of contradictions and complexities. And sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that don't fit neatly into a box.
For sure.
Anders Holch Povlsen, he's a fashion CEO. He's a land tycoon. He's a conservationist. And he's a human being with all the flaws and complexities that come with that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's worth remembering. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.